She owns the hotel, but no one at the front desk knows it. What follows is a moment that exposes something deeper than just a mistake. The late afternoon sun filtered through the windows of the Grand Westbrook Hotel in Tampa, Florida. The air inside the lobby buzzed with the quiet hum of conversation and the soft shuffle of footsteps. The hotel, a five-star property in the heart of downtown, had its usual flow of guests: business people, tourists, and occasional celebrities. The polished marble floors gleamed under the golden light, and the scent of fresh flowers from the lobby arrangements lingered in the air. Everything looked perfect. Behind the front desk, a young receptionist named Jenna adjusted her name tag nervously. It was her third week at the hotel, and she still wasn't fully comfortable with the fast pace. She had been assigned the night shift, and she could already feel the pressure mounting. The rush of check-ins and the phone ringing every few minutes didn't make it any easier. She tried her best to keep a smile on her face, but today felt different. It was quiet, almost too quiet, and Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. A soft click of the front door's handle turned her attention toward the entrance. She glanced up to see a woman step inside, her confident stride drawing attention. The woman was tall, dressed in a black blazer, tailored slacks, and a simple white blouse. Her appearance wasn't flashy, but there was an undeniable air of authority about her, the kind you don't find just anywhere. Jenna's eyes instinctively widened. The woman was striking, but what truly stood out was the quiet, steady confidence in her every step. "Good evening," Jenna said, trying to force her usual smile. "How may I assist you today?" The woman with sharp, observant eyes returned the greeting. "I'm checking in. I believe my reservation is under Maya Daniels." Her voice was calm, collected, and the kind that carried authority without needing to raise its volume. Jenna quickly reached for the computer, tapping the keys to search for the reservation. As she typed, she glanced up at the woman again, her gaze lingering for a second longer than usual. There was something about the woman that felt familiar. Maybe it was the confident stance, or perhaps the way she carried herself, like someone used to being in charge. But Jenna pushed the thought aside. After all, many of the guests here had that same aura. A lot of high-powered professionals passed through these doors. "Maya Daniels, right?" Jenna murmured, more to herself than to the guest. After a brief moment, she found the reservation. "There it is," Jenna continued, reading the screen. "A deluxe suite for 2 nights. Could I see your ID, please?" She offered a smile as she prepared to check the guest in. Maya didn't seem to flinch, but there was a small shift in her posture. Jenna, oblivious, didn't notice the slight change in the atmosphere. Maya reached into her purse and slid a card across the counter, her fingers brushing the smooth surface of the desk. Jenna took the card without thinking much of it and looked it over. "Thank you, Ms. Daniels," Jenna said, her tone still friendly but slightly distracted. "I'll need to confirm some details, just a quick security check. Could you tell me your full address and the last 4 digits of your social?" Maya raised an eyebrow but remained composed. "I'm sure you've got all that already. It's in the system." Jenna nodded but stuck to her routine. She wasn't about to let this slip, no matter who the guest was. "I understand, Ms. Daniels, but it's hotel policy." She gave a tight smile, still oblivious to the subtle tension rising in the exchange. Maya paused for a moment. There was a slight flicker of recognition, but she brushed it off. "I'd appreciate it if you just checked the system," she said, her voice still calm but now carrying a note of professionalism that Jenna wasn't expecting. But Jenna wasn't done. "Sorry, it's just procedure. I'll need to see some identification." She gestured to the sign on the counter that outlined the hotel's security measures for all guests, and then added, "It's really not a big deal. Just a quick formality." There was a pause. Maya's lips pressed into a thin line and her eyes flicked over to the side, her gaze flickering for a brief second. "You know," she said slowly, her voice tinged with a calm but growing frustration, "I'm actually the owner of this hotel." Her words dropped into the air with an almost imperceptible weight. She wasn't shouting, but the weight of what she said couldn't be ignored. Jenna, still oblivious, continued typing on her computer. "I'm sorry, but I'll still need to confirm the details before I can process your check-in," she said a little too quickly. Maya could feel the growing tension in the air, but she maintained her composed expression. "I assure you I own this hotel," she repeated, her voice steady. I'm Maya Daniels, the CEO. The words hung there, suspended in the air for a second too long. Jenna's fingers faltered over the keyboard. Her eyes lifted slowly, then quickly darted to Maya's face, then back down to the screen. But then it hit her. Her heart skipped. Her eyes widened just a little. This was the CEO, Maya Daniels. She had heard the name before, of course. It was plastered all over the company's press releases, all over the news. The woman standing before her was one of the most powerful figures in the hospitality industry, the same woman who had expanded her hotel empire across the country. But in that moment, Jenna's face flushed a deep red, and she immediately began scrambling to fix the mistake. I'm so sorry, Miss Daniels, Jenna stammered. Her voice suddenly high-pitched with embarrassment. She was fumbling over her words, feeling a sudden pit form in her stomach. Maya's eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, but with something much more familiar, the understanding of what had just happened. The receptionist had made a mistake, a simple yet deeply telling mistake, one that spoke to the biases in the workplace, the assumptions about who could be in charge based on how someone looked. Jenna quickly adjusted, trying to mask her anxiety with a flurry of apologies. It's just procedure, I didn't realize. Her voice trailed off, not knowing what else to say. Maya didn't react right away. She stood tall, quiet for a beat, her expression unreadable. But in that moment, she knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't just a mistake. It was the subtle bias that often crept in when people of color were in positions of power. But she chose to remain calm, to let the moment unfold. Jenna, right? Maya said, her voice low but steady. It's okay. I understand that you're just doing your job. Jenna nodded frantically, still flustered. She didn't know what to do next. Maya smiled, but it wasn't a warm one. How about we just go ahead with the check-in now? No need to worry about the details, she said with an easygoing air, clearly making the decision not to escalate the situation further. But Jenna still felt the sting of the mistake, and she couldn't help but wonder how often this sort of thing happened without anyone noticing. Maya stood silently, watching as Jenna scrambled to recover from the blunder. The young receptionist's fingers fumbled over the keyboard as she tried to make the necessary adjustments to the reservation, her eyes flicking nervously between the screen and Maya's composed face. It was clear the situation had caught her off guard, but the discomfort lingered in the air between them like an invisible fog. Jenna couldn't seem to decide whether to look directly at Maya or avoid her gaze altogether. I'm really sorry, Ms. Daniels, she repeated, her voice shaky now. I didn't recognize you. Without, she trailed off awkwardly, her face flushed a deep shade of crimson. Maya didn't say anything right away. She was careful with her words, letting the silence hang in the air for just a moment longer than usual. The receptionist's discomfort was palpable, and Maya wasn't in a hurry to rush things along. In fact, she had never been in a situation like this before, where her very presence seemed to cause so much disarray. In her years of running a multi-million-dollar company, she had been in boardrooms, press conferences, and global meetings. She'd shaken hands with heads of state, sat down with billionaires, and had her face splashed on the covers of magazines. But this moment, in this hotel lobby, felt strangely different. It wasn't the mistake that bothered Maya. It was the way it highlighted something much deeper. The underlying assumptions about who could hold power, who could be the boss, and how people made judgments based on appearances. It wasn't just a simple mix-up, it was a reminder of the subtle biases that often shaped interactions in the workplace. But Maya wasn't going to let that moment become a battle. She had learned long ago that sometimes the best way to teach a lesson was through composure and grace. Jenna, Maya said after a brief pause, her voice calm but firm, I understand that you're just doing your job, but I want you to think about something. Jenna stopped typing mid-keystroke, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She looked up at Maya, unsure of what to expect next. I don't blame you for the mistake, Maya continued, leaning slightly forward over the counter, her gaze steady. But I want you to think about why this happened. Jenna blinked, trying to process the question. She had already apologized multiple times, but Maya wasn't asking for an apology. She was asking for awareness. Maya allowed the question to hang in the air for a moment before answering it herself. You didn't recognize me, did you? I don't blame you for that either. I'm dressed simply. I don't have a flashy appearance, but I'm still the CEO of this company. Jenna's eyes widened as the words sank in. She opened her mouth to say something, but Maya held up her hand to stop her. No need to apologize again, Maya said with a soft smile. It's a simple mistake, but the reason it happened isn't so simple. It's a reflection of how we sometimes make assumptions about people based on how they look or how they're dressed. The receptionist's face seemed to soften, her discomfort giving way to a growing sense of understanding. She lowered her gaze, her hands finally still as she placed the ID card back on the counter. I guess I didn't think about it like that, Jenna admitted, her voice quieter now. I've been trained to follow protocol, to ask for identification every time. But I didn't see you as the CEO. Maya nodded, her expression serious. That's exactly the point. You see, in this business, appearance is everything. But sometimes we forget that the person standing before us could be far more than just what they look like. And when you're the one in charge, it's important to be aware of how your actions can affect others, whether it's the staff, the guests, or even the people who might walk through this door. Jenna shifted uncomfortably, the weight of Maya's words pressing down on her. I never meant to disrespect you, she said quickly, her eyes now on Maya, searching for any sign of irritation or anger. I just didn't know. Maya smiled again, this time a bit warmer, though there was still an underlying seriousness in her expression. It's not about disrespect, Jenna, it's about awareness. About understanding that the biases we hold, even the smallest ones, can shape the way we interact with people. And those biases can create barriers, even when we don't mean to. The receptionist's shoulders slumped slightly as she absorbed Maya's words. She was beginning to see the bigger picture, and the realization made her feel uneasy, but also determined. She nodded slowly, her mind racing. I understand now, she said softly. It's not just about following the rules. It's about treating people with respect, no matter who they are or what they look like. Maya's lips curled into a small, approving smile. Exactly. And it's okay to make mistakes, Jenna. We all do. But what matters is how we learn from them. There was a brief silence between them, and for a moment, Jenna just stood there, processing everything that had been said. Maya had never raised her voice, never shown any anger or frustration, but there was a quiet power in her words that Jenna couldn't ignore. But just as the tension started to ease, the moment was interrupted. The door to the back office swung open, and a manager, Greg, emerged, walking briskly toward the front desk. He glanced at Maya, then at Jenna, and a look of confusion crossed his face. He recognized Maya immediately, but the exchange between her and Jenna didn't go unnoticed. Everything all right here? Greg asked, his voice businesslike but curious. Maya turned to him, her expression shifting slightly. She gave him a small nod. Everything's fine, she said, just a little teaching moment. But perhaps you should make sure everyone knows I'm in the building. Greg nodded, quickly realizing the gravity of the situation. Of course, Miss Daniels. I'll take care of it right away. Jenna, feeling the weight of the lesson she had just received, glanced up at Maya again. The CEO's poise and calmness were striking, especially given how much the situation could have escalated. But Maya's grace in handling it all left a lasting impression. But as Maya walked toward the elevators, Jenna's mind was still spinning. She had learned something important today, something that would stay with her for a long time. The next few minutes felt like a blur for Jenna. Her hands moved mechanically, as if on autopilot, processing a few more check-ins while her mind replayed the earlier conversation with Maya over and over again. She couldn't shake the weight of what had just happened. The encounter with the CEO was still fresh in her mind, and the realization of her mistake kept gnawing at her. It wasn't just about the identification, the minor slip-up. It was about the deeper message that Maya had so casually shared. It was about the biases we all carry, often without realizing it. Jenna had been guilty of those assumptions, the quick judgments based on appearances, even though she thought of herself as an open-minded and fair person. She hadn't even considered for a second that the woman who walked through the door could be the CEO, someone with the power to make decisions that affected not just this hotel, but an entire chain of them. But then it hit her. Why hadn't she recognized Maya right away? She had seen the CEO's face in magazines, heard her name in industry news, and even read about her achievements. How could she, of all people, not have made that connection? Was it because Maya was dressed simply, with no flashy accessories or obvious status symbols? Was it because Maya was black and Jenna wasn't used to seeing black women in such positions of authority? Jenna's stomach tightened at the thought. She hadn't consciously made any racist or discriminatory assumptions, but she realized now how easily those biases could creep in. It wasn't that she had seen Maya as less than or unimportant, but that she had subconsciously expected someone of Maya's stature to look a certain way, to fit a mold. As the minutes ticked by, Jenna couldn't help but think about how often she had been conditioned by the world around her to recognize power only in certain forms. How many times had she looked at successful people and assumed their appearance said everything about their capabilities? The more she thought about it, the more uncomfortable she became. She was interrupted by a soft knock at the counter, followed by Greg's voice. "Jenna, you got a minute?" he asked, his tone professional, but with an edge of curiosity. Jenna looked up, her thoughts still scattered. She nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, what's up?" Greg leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "So I just got word that Ms. Daniels is doing a surprise tour of the hotel. I'd like you to keep an eye on the lobby and be ready in case she needs anything." Jenna blinked, a little caught off guard. Sure, but Greg, she already checked in?" Greg nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. "Yeah, but you know how it goes. She likes to get the lay of the land, so just stay sharp." "Got it," Jenna replied, her voice slightly more tense now. Maya's words still echoed in her mind, and her heart skipped at the thought of seeing her again. The CEO hadn't seemed upset, but there had been a quiet sharpness to the way she had spoken, like she knew exactly how often this sort of thing happened. Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that she had just been taught a lesson she wasn't quite ready for. As Greg walked away, Jenna took a deep breath, adjusting the papers in front of her. The lobby felt busier now. More people were checking in, some with luggage, some just walking through, their faces distracted by phones and tablet screens. It was easy to forget how many people passed through these doors every day, all with their own stories, their own experiences, their own expectations. Jenna's gaze drifted to the elevators, where the glass doors slid open. She caught a glimpse of Maya walking toward the lobby, her presence commanding the space. The CEO's steps were deliberate, her eyes scanning the room as if she had seen it all 1,000 times before. She was dressed simply, but the power she exuded was undeniable. It wasn't about the clothes, it was about the way she moved through the space with absolute confidence, knowing exactly who she was. Maya's eyes caught Jenna's, and for a moment their gazes locked. Jenna quickly looked away, feeling her face flush once more. She wasn't sure if Maya had noticed her discomfort, but something in her expression suggested that she had. Maya wasn't just the CEO, she was an embodiment of quiet strength, someone who carried her authority without the need to prove it to anyone. It was the kind of power that made people pause, even if they didn't understand it at first. But Maya didn't let the moment linger. She walked past Jenna and toward the back of the lobby, where she was met by a few members of the management team. Jenna watched her go, still feeling that strange knot in her stomach. But just as the CEO disappeared around the corner, something inside Jenna shifted. For the first time, she truly understood what Maya had meant when she said, "It's about awareness." The realization didn't come all at once, but gradually, as she reflected on her own actions and assumptions. Maya hadn't just given her a lesson on how to handle a mistake gracefully. She had opened Jenna's eyes to the unspoken barriers that often went unnoticed. The biases weren't always intentional. They didn't always come in the form of overt racism or hostility. Sometimes they were much more subtle, quiet assumptions based on how people looked, how they were dressed, or how they carried themselves. Jenna had never thought about it like that before, but now she couldn't stop. She knew now that it wasn't enough to just go through the motions, to simply follow the rules or check off boxes. It was about looking at every situation with a more thoughtful lens, considering how the smallest interactions could be influenced by unconscious biases. It wasn't just about treating people fairly, it was about truly seeing them for who they were. Jenna sighed, her thoughts still swirling. There was no easy answer, no quick fix, but one thing was clear. This was something she couldn't ignore. But even as she stood there, grappling with the lesson she had just learned, she knew that this was just the beginning. The evening wore on, and the lobby of the Grand Westbrook Hotel buzzed with the usual activity. Guests came and went, some with a quiet nod to the receptionist, others rushing past with their eyes glued to their phones. Jenna was still on edge, her mind replaying every word she had exchanged with Maya earlier. Despite her best efforts to focus on her work, the weight of the lesson from earlier lingered, a constant presence in the back of her mind. The clock on the wall ticked toward closing time, and Jenna found herself glancing toward the elevator every few minutes, expecting to see Maya's tall figure emerge. She wasn't sure what exactly had shifted in her since their brief interaction, but she knew something had. Maybe it was the sharp realization of her own biases, or perhaps it was the way Maya had handled everything with such grace and dignity. Either way, Jenna couldn't stop thinking about it. Then, as if on cue, the elevator doors slid open again. Maya stepped out, this time not in the company of the management team but alone. Her calm demeanor hadn't faltered in the least, but there was something different about her now. She was walking toward the front desk with purpose, her eyes scanning the room as if evaluating every detail. Jenna stood up straighter, already aware of what was about to happen, and found herself, for the first time, truly paying attention to every little detail. The way Maya moved, the way she held her head high, and the quiet confidence that seemed to emanate from her with every step. Jenna's pulse quickened as Maya approached the counter. She could feel the weight of the earlier moment between them, still fresh, still unresolved in some ways. But as Maya reached the desk, she didn't say anything immediately. Instead, she studied Jenna for a moment, her eyes focused but not harsh. "Jenna," Maya began, her voice steady, "I wanted to take a moment to thank you." Jenna blinked, surprised. She had expected a simple check-in or perhaps a quick inquiry about the rest of the hotel. But this wasn't what she was expecting at all. Thank me?" she stammered, unsure of what Maya was referring to. Maya smiled, a small, knowing smile that carried more weight than any words could. "You handled yourself well earlier. I could tell that you understood what I was saying." Not everyone would. Jenna's face softened. She wasn't sure what to say, but she could feel the sincerity in Maya's voice. The unease she'd carried with her all evening slowly began to melt away. "You see," Maya continued, "it's easy for people to react to mistakes with defensiveness or embarrassment. But you didn't. You took it in stride, and that says a lot about you." Jenna didn't know what to say in response, but she felt a sense of relief wash over her. In that moment, she realized something important. This wasn't about a mistake at all. It wasn't about who was right or wrong. It was about being able to listen, to reflect, and to grow. And in that moment, that was what Maya had offered her. "I'm grateful for that," Maya added, her tone still calm but now infused with a sense of appreciation. "It's not easy learning to see things differently. It takes time, but you're already on the right path." Jenna nodded, her eyes downcast for a moment. The weight of everything, her own assumptions, her biases, and the lessons learned, settled within her. But Maya's presence, her quiet assurance, allowed Jenna to take a deep breath, as though for the first time in hours the knot in her stomach loosened. "I really appreciate that, Ms. Daniels," Jenna said softly, her voice sincere. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and I get it now. It wasn't just about the ID or the rules. It's about seeing people for who they really are." Maya's smile widened, her eyes warm. "Exactly. It's not just about the rules, Jenna. It's about how we treat people, how we truly see them. And that goes beyond just appearance. It's the understanding, the awareness." For a moment, the two women stood there in silence, the noise of the hool around them almost fading away. It was an odd moment, one where everything seemed to pause, just long enough for them to share something that felt almost sacred. A quiet connection formed in the wake of an uncomfortable mistake. But the silence didn't last for long. Greg, the manager, approached again, this time with a more casual expression on his face. He glanced at Maya, then at Jenna. His eyes flicked between them with curiosity, but he didn't say anything. Maya turned to him, still calm, still composed, as though everything had already been resolved. "Everything okay here?" Greg asked, his eyes lingering on Maya for just a moment longer than usual. Maya nodded. "Everything's fine, Greg. I was just telling Jenna that she's doing a great job." Her eyes met Jenna's for a brief second, and the unspoken understanding between them hung in the air for just a moment longer. Greg looked slightly surprised, but he quickly recovered. "That's good to hear," he said. "I'll make sure to pass along the feedback to the team." As Greg walked away, Maya turned back to the counter, preparing to leave for the evening. Before she did, she paused for a moment, her gaze shifting to Jenna once more. "I'll see you around, Jenna. Bye," Maya said with a small but genuine smile. "Keep learning. Keep growing. You're on the right track." And with that, Maya turned and walked toward the door, her steps as confident as ever. Jenna watched her go, feeling the weight of the interaction finally lift off her shoulders. But as the door closed behind Maya, Jenna felt something shift inside her. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was truly seeing the world around her, really seeing it with all its nuances and complexities. The biases, the assumptions, the quick judgments, all of it had been a part of her story, but it didn't have to define her future. Jenna stood at the counter for a long moment, deep in thought. There was still a lot of work to be done. She still had a lot to learn. But Maya had given her the most important lesson of all: to see people as they truly are, to approach every situation with understanding, and to take responsibility for the biases we all carry, no matter how small or subtle they may be. Jenna took a deep breath and smiled to herself, a quiet resolve settling within her. This was just the beginning. But as the hotel buzzed around her, Jenna knew that she was no longer the same person who had made that mistake earlier in the day. The next few days at the Grand Westbrook Hotel passed by in a blur of check-ins, phone calls, and guests rushing in and out. Jenna worked the same shifts, sat at the same front desk, and carried out the same duties. But everything had changed for her. The lessons from that evening with Maya Daniels continued to ripple through her thoughts, guiding her in ways she hadn't expected. Each time she greeted a guest, she now made an effort to truly see them beyond the surface. It wasn't just about their appearance or the role they seemed to fit into. It was about understanding that everyone had a story, and it was her responsibility to treat them with respect, no matter their background, status, or how they were dressed. Jenna found herself reflecting on the quiet biases that had influenced her actions for years, those subtle assumptions she hadn't even known she was carrying. But now she was more aware, more conscious of the way she viewed the world. A few days later, as Jenna was finishing her shift, she received a surprise. A small envelope was left for her at the front desk, with her name neatly written in bold ink. It was from Maya Daniels. Inside was a handwritten note, simple but powerful. "Jenna, I just wanted to say thank you again for your openness and your willingness to learn. It's easy to follow the rules, but it takes courage to change the way you think. Keep challenging yourself and keep striving to see the world as it truly is. We can't change everything, but we can always start with ourselves. Take care, Maya Daniels." Jenna read the note several times, her eyes lingering on the words. There was something deeply humbling about it. Maya hadn't just pointed out the mistake or reprimanded her. She had encouraged her, shown her the path to growth without ever making her feel small. And that, Jenna realized, was the true power of leadership, not in authority or titles, but in the quiet strength to guide others, to teach them without tearing them down. As she stood there holding the note, Jenna felt a new sense of clarity. The bias that had clouded her vision was still there, but now she had the tools to recognize it. She had learned that growth wasn't just about acknowledging a mistake. It was about owning it, understanding it, and using it to become better. And as she folded the note carefully and tucked it into her bag, she knew that the lesson Maya had imparted on her was more than just a one-time experience. It was something she would carry with her, shaping how she saw the world and how she treated the people she encountered every day. Maya's lesson wasn't just about the hotel industry. It was about life, about seeing people for who they truly were and learning to let go of the biases that kept her from fully understanding them. Jenna knew now that true leadership, true strength, came from embracing the things that made us different and learning from them, not avoiding them. And as she walked out into the cool evening air, Jenna felt a quiet confidence rise within her. This wasn't the end of the journey, it was just the beginning. We all carry biases, whether we realize it or not, but by being aware of them and taking the time to listen, to reflect, and to learn them, we can break down those barriers and build a more inclusive, respectful world. Leadership is about more than titles. It's about the ability to teach, guide, and encourage growth, both in ourselves and in others. If you've ever made assumptions or found yourself in a similar situation, take a moment to reflect on how you see the world around you. Challenge your own biases, embrace change, and remember that every encounter is an opportunity to learn and grow. Let's all work towards a more inclusive and understanding future, one step at a time.